There is closed captioning available by selecting the CC closed caption button and then show subtitle. Zoom also has a link for you to connect with if you have any technical difficulties during this webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and now I will hand it over to my colleague, Corey.
Hello and welcome. So I have the pleasure of introducing Michael Poima. He has been with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs since January 2007. Before joining the Veteran Readiness and Employment program as an employment specialist, Mike spent nearly 5 years serving veterans in Illinois as a disabled veterans outreach program specialist. He's been a transition assistance program facilitator, veterans readiness and employment coordinator, and assistant statewide coordinator for veterans programs, all within the Illinois Department of Employment Security. Mike is a service disabled Army veteran who served in active duty from 1990 to 1993 as a Black Hawk helicopter repairer. His deployments include tours in Germany, Turkey, and Iraq. After military service, he obtained a bachelor's degree from Ohio State University while participating in Veterans Readiness and Employment program. Mike is a father of 2 boys, ages 19 and 7, and lives in Williamston, Michigan. He is the executive director for InvestVets, which is an employment committee of the Lansing Area Veterans Coalition, and is a member of the Disabled American Veterans, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and American Legion service organizations. Mike was appointed by Michigan Governor Rick Snyder to be a member of the Michigan Council for Rehabilitation Services from 2013 to 2018 as a disabled veterans advocate. He is currently an employment specialist at the VA Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment. And without further ado, I will now pass it off to Mike to get us started with today's presentation.
Corey, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that introduction. And of course, many thanks also to Lisa and Julie and Tyler with Michigan Rehabilitation Services. You guys are wonderful, and it is such a pleasure and really an honor to be able to present some of this information with your group today, and especially with only 2 days remaining before Veterans Day. Quite an appropriate timing to be able to talk about military culture and how veterans employment works in the state of Michigan, from my perspective at least. So thank you so much for joining us today. You know, I have been with, as Corey mentioned, it seems like a lot of information about me. But I can tell you that I've been with the VA here in Michigan for 15 years, and my relationship and working relationship with MRS goes back almost to the beginning of this career of mine in the VA. And there's so many different things that I could probably point out. But what I can tell you is that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the program that I work for, which is Veteran Readiness and Employment, historically, we used to be known, of course, as vocational rehabilitation and employment. Our programs mirror each other in respect to the primary mission, which is mitigating, reducing the impact of disabilities for people and helping them gain time, being able to gain the skills and resources necessary in order to find work. We do the same thing, of course, at the VA, but we have shared over the years. I know that we have shared clients with you. It is often the case that our programs complement one another. In other words, there are services and resources that MRS can provide to veterans and clients that the VA can't, and vice versa. So I do know that over the years, a number of clients have both had cases with us, with the Department of VA, but also with MRS. And so that collaboration and that sharing of information and that partnership is definitely strong. And I just would like to report on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs just how grateful we are to have that partnership. So a couple of the things that I, would like to mention, we may be able to repeat this towards the end of the presentation, is that, upcoming trainings or other resources that may be available. One of the things that I think that you can expect in the future is follow-up presentations involving some of the more, let's say, some of the more tangible aspects about working with the veteran population with respect to some of their needs and some of the questions that they may have for you if you're working with or approached by a veteran. Some of those tips and suggestions could be along the lines of resume formation. It could be developing interviewing skills. I think, of course, we want to talk about disabilities and accommodations, a variety of different kinds of disabling conditions. And certainly we may be able to get into areas of tips for retention and tips for both business and the veterans themselves to when it comes to transitioning into a new role, especially so soon for our veterans who transition out of the military. It may be their first job, for example. There are a lot of challenges that veterans face after the transition. I may touch on that a little bit today, but mostly today we're going to be talking about just the culture, the general culture of being in the military. And I will certainly be able to use some of my own personal history about this, but also share, anecdotal information. And I think we even have a brief video for you to observe. So also one of the other things that we should be able to do is provide you with a much more robust list or directory of resources and points of contact. I'm very blessed to do what I do. I'm one guy, I work for the VA, and I, of course, am the executive director of Invest Vets. But those kinds of efforts can't happen without a lot of other people and a lot of other support. And I can assure you that around the state of Michigan, there are just a wide variety of resources out there and other types of organizations that you may want to connect with or have the knowledge of while you are working with your veterans. So with that said, I think let's go on to the next slide and kind of jump in to the presentation. So military culture, how to begin with something like this. Most of my presentations involving military culture have been for employers. And I'm going to give you some of that same information as well, because I think having an understanding of the conditions for what drives people to go into the military is definitely important. Having an understanding of the just how qualified, just how capable individuals are when they go into the military, for example, can demonstrate the strength of those folks once they gain military experience, if that makes sense. And I'll be able to illustrate some of this. I can tell you from personal experience that the basic training period is definitely the most abrupt change and transformation that can occur to a human being. I'm saying that from personal experience. I laugh because it has been a number of years ago, but there are times when I can remember things like it was yesterday. There is no question that what led me, I'll tell you about this, what led me to go into the military in the first place was definitely a love of country and patriotism, wanting to do something and participate in something that was greater than myself. I do follow some lineage in my family. In fact, going all the way back to World War I, of people in my family, most men, but going back to World War I. And I felt, especially as a child, growing up and watching television, I remember sitting with my dad years ago, watching a little black and white TV and watching Walter Cronkite on the CBS Evening News and seeing images of Vietnam on television. And of course, at my age, I really didn't understand all of the social and all the political and the ramifications of warfare and the culture at the time. But what I saw were people who were Americans who were going and were being sent or going to another place to protect our freedoms. And that's what I was told. And so that became very important to me. I did enlist a little later than the average enlistee. Most enlistees who go into the military, whether it be the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, or the Air Force, are usually between the ages of about 18 to 21. It tends to be the sort of the prime age of going in. I actually went in just a little bit later than that. I went in at the age of 23, but young enough to have been, in fact, transformed myself. And we received that in basic training very abruptly. So that individual, that free thinking, quite honestly, I guess we could probably talk about having long hair or longer hair, which definitely was my case at the time. It was that individualism, that free thinking, free speaking kid got off of a bus at Fort Dix, New Jersey in April of 1990. And in a very quick and a very brief period of time, you lose all of that individualism. Everything that makes you an individual with certain rights, certain freedoms to be able to speak freely, that usually is pretty much squashed. But there's a purpose behind that. I think one way to be able to illustrate this would be to watch a brief video. And so if we can maybe run that video now, and then I want to return to the slide if we could.
Privates, let's go! We don't have all day! Hurry up and get down the friggin' hill! Let's go, let's go, let's go! Go!
You brought all that stuff with you! You're not gonna be able to carry it? Just stop right there! Stop right there! Carry the freaking bag! Carry it! Lift it off the damn ground! And it's yes, drill sergeant! You got that? Say it! Yes, drill sergeant!
What you just saw was the initial reception of the privates coming from the 43rd to their unit and first made aware of how big a change is coming into their life.
Do you understand? Yes, pick up the friggin' bag and let's go! Hurry up!
Going from civilian to soldier, the soldierization process has a number of steps. The first step is the shock and awe.
You wanna cry? Are you gonna cry?
It doesn't look all that pleasant because we are pushing them.
Do not not set your bag down. What don't you understand about that? You brought it, you carry it. Yes, no, Sergeant. Pick that bag up.
Our goal is to stress them because combat is far more stressful than anything that we're going to do to them.
You're gonna be carrying dang weapons. I don't know if I trust any of you with a dang spitball, let alone an M16 or an M4. Yes, no, Sergeant.
Becoming a United States Army soldier is not something that's going to be easy. Transforming yourself from civilians to part of the world's most elite fighting force is a journey that will transform you both physically and mentally.
We are primarily teaching them the ability to move quick, fast, and in a hurry, which they do not have. Our goal is to make them both physically and mentally strong. And it has to start somewhere. When it all boils down to it, if they don't acclimate, if they don't soldierize, it could be their lives or the lives of their battle buddies to the left and right.
Everybody come to one move! Let's go safe moving! Let's go, quickly!
It was kind of a shock when I got here and all the drill sergeants were like all in our faces, yelling and stuff, and I don't know, it's kind of frightening at first, but I mean, as time went on and we got to know them and their personalities, I mean, things started getting easier like day by day.
Hey, you have enlisted in the military, something the majority of society would never do. So you've already been a success. You've taken that extra step. Don't give up on day one. Because if you quit now, you're gonna quit at everything else that you ever try to do in your life.
Why are you here? I don't know.
So thank you very much for playing that. If we could go back to the other slide, I would just want to mention a couple things. You know, first of all, that for me personally, that really does take me back to the actual experience itself. A couple things I can say though. One is that what you saw was relatively, let's just say, calm compared to the real thing. I can assure you that there was a lot of much more choice language, colorful language that was going on, and it was pretty much relentless what you saw there. And that goes on for a few weeks, in fact, out of the entire near 10 weeks that we're there. But you know what? There's truth about, you know, with that transformation that takes place. There is such a value there to the military mission because what the drill sergeant said was very true, is that combat experience is definitely the most and can be one of the most, if not the most stressful situations that any person could be subjected to. Basic training is a way to get your body and your mind into a position of being able to react in a positive way that will help further and complete a mission. If we had to step back and wait and to think about what we're going to do, or if we had serious emotional rejection of a particular task, the military could not function. One of the other things that I could point out is that high tension, that real high stress level that you may have seen in that day one video, it eventually subsides over the 10 weeks. And what we learn is that we are part of now a team. We're part of, we've moved from one individual, one person down the line of a formation to really more of a team that can accomplish things together. And we learn how to do that regardless of who that person is, male, female, black, white, short, tall, doesn't matter. Everyone ends up working together because it's successful for the team and successful for the mission if we do. Some of the things that I encourage people to consider about enlistees and people who go in, especially as it relates to potential employment opportunities when we get out, are the fact that we don't need necessarily resumes or applications to the degree that we do out here in the civilian workforce. It is relatively easy to get into the military if you consider some of these things that, the military will accept you if you have, even if you don't have a high school education or a GED, you can still get that. But they take the best of the best from the population. You can be assigned or you can get into the military by passing some basic tests for your like vocational type assessments, your intellect, your abilities. There are so many different types of batteries, including physical and mental and everything, that we all have to pass before we go in. But the way it works typically is that once, depending on your score, and I'll use one example, it's called ASVAB, and I don't expect anyone to remember that, but the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. If your scores are high enough, you can almost pick any job that you want going into the military. Conversely, when we get out of the military, doesn't work that way. We don't get to go to an employer and say, I have all this stuff, all this experience and qualifications, and I think I would like to select this level of opportunity within your company. It doesn't work that way. However, recruiters are good at selling the military in that sense, that you can come in and really create your own path. And though there is some truth to that, it also could provide and lead some military to come up with unrealistic expectations after and once the transition starts. So, when you think about things like, jobs, no experience required, the initial recruits are typically going to be the top third of the population at the time. Once the military has rejected people who can't pass some of these mental, some of these physical requirements, some of the aptitude tests. Perhaps there are some severe or serious legal or background issues that prevent people from going in. What happens though is that, and the reality is that about 94% of those people who are going into the military do have a high school diploma, degree, a GED, or some college, versus just 30% of the same population of that size. And I think I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. So, by the way, the items that I included in this, I was able to find. There's an article called Face the Facts USA from the George Washington University. But you also have to consider that we are volunteers in the military, plus we also tend to not have work experience in the traditional sense, in the civilian sense. And we also don't have those job-seeking skills. So there are inherently some challenges, even before we go into the military, that once we get out of the military, and I haven't even mentioned anything about disabilities yet, these things can set us up for being sort of operating from a deficit already when we get out. Let's go on to the next slide. And that would be the military service transformation and culture slide, please. There it is right there. Thank you. So this is really sort of a typical life cycle within the military. You've seen the video, and you've seen and had a sort of a basic understanding of the type of culture that we operate within. I can assure you that your military career, and to be fair, I was only active duty for 3 years because I got hurt and had to be medically separated out of the military well before I was ready. But I can tell you that during those 3 years, basic training and what happened there is not the way the whole military career goes. Basic training is really there just to shock you into that military mindset of being able to operate, particularly being able to operate under stress or under duress. We all wear the same uniform. We are then uniform in uniformity in terms of our look, our appearance, our mannerisms, our speech, the way that we talk to one another, and certainly how we reply and respond to that so-called chain of command, which is our leadership. And that would be even whether it would be for enlisted personnel or for officers. There is definitely a protocol and ways of being able to converse with authority figures. So basic training gets you started. It gets you the shock and awe, as the sergeant said, of being accustomed to that part of the culture. But then we progress, and most of us will go off to what's known as AIT. And I'm speaking about the Army. There are other terms for other schools in other branches, but for today's purpose, I'm going to talk about the Army. In the Army, we have advanced training, and that usually is called AIT, or Advanced Individual Training. In my case, I went to my advanced individual training from Fort Dix, New Jersey, down to Fort Eustis, Virginia. And this is where I was able to learn the skills and get that experience of working on UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. And that school, unlike basic training, that school was several months long. So by the time we get into our, perhaps fourth, fifth, sixth month of being in the military, we probably have also gained one or two additional rank or movement in rank. So if you come into the Army and you are basically just a private E1, which is that little symbol, the little chevron, that's just one. But by the time you finish AIT, most of us have usually added what's known as a rocker, which is the little curvy piece at the bottom of that, and that's for a private first class. So that there is movement there. There is career progression already happening within your first 6 months on the job, 6 to 12 months especially. But it goes beyond that. Then we start getting into changes in our duty station. And that can happen in my 3 years. My permanent duty station really only changed twice, even though I had some deployment time in some of the countries that were mentioned in my bio. But when we do that, we usually do that when we move under permanent orders for change of duty station. That usually comes in the form of orders that are coming from really, like a central command point from the Department of Defense. Sometimes we get to request and say where we want to go, but not always are those places honored, or at least they're not, and it really has to do with the priority of the military and the Department of Defense at the time. But the purpose in telling you about this is because, if you think back to moments in your own life where you have moved perhaps across town, maybe to another part of the state, or in many instances, perhaps from one state to another, sometimes from one country to another. And I think that most of us would agree that those changes can be stressful in and of themselves. You may have even the perfect move or close to the perfect move with respect to moving all of your items from one place to another. The timing, you haven't lost anything in the move, or it seems like the timing, everything fits together. Well, that happens also in the military, but it also happens often very abruptly, and it can happen with very little notice. These are training situations, these are deployments. And so when I talk about movement in the military, I'm talking about imagine being in your home. Imagine being in your home and you are abruptly awakened at 3:30 in the morning, and you are told that in less than 10 minutes, you must have yourself in uniform and all of your belongings, usually in what are known as A and B bags, the letter A, the letter B. You have to have all of that stuff out to a bus. Perhaps it's a helicopter or an aircraft, and you have 10 minutes to be there if they give you that much time. Then basically jumping in and getting into this vehicle and sometimes not even knowing where you're going. This is part of being in the military, as being able to pick up and literally leave your home, and you may not know when you're coming back. That is a reality in the military, and that can be quite stressful for a lot of, certainly for a lot of military and also for families as well. So I want to illustrate that. I also wanted to point out about career progression. You know, in the military, everyone wears a uniform, so we identify with one another through the uniform, through the hats that we wear, the rank or insignia. The symbols of what are on the uniform can tell us very briefly who that person is. We of course can tell their name. Their name is on their uniform. We know what unit or perhaps division that they're in. If they have served in a combat theater, in a combat zone, you can tell if in the Army based on that insignia. There are jobs. You can identify whether someone is in the infantry, if someone is in aviation, like me, maybe they were in the Corps of Engineers or maybe in healthcare. A lot of that can be determined just by looking, and especially rank. You can tell everyone wears their rank. So you know when you walk into any space in the military, you can usually identify in a very quick period of time who the leaders are, who is in charge. That can't be as easy as it is out in the civilian world. When our veterans return and go back to work, I definitely have heard my share of veterans kind of complain and point out that it's really hard to find out who the authority figures are, how to approach them, whether they're have that so-called open door policy, or whether it's appropriate to ask questions, for example. These are real challenges for transitioning veterans. So we go through this cycle of training, changing duty stations, the career progression, and wearing multiple hats. And we are definitely from one to team during this process. Let's go to the next slide. And this is the military service and culture, the big picture. And really what the purpose of the military is then, is we are there to fight and win wars. Yes, the military has other missions. In fact, when I served and during my deployment, yes, I was deployed to Turkey and Iraq during the Gulf War. But our particular mission was more humanitarian in nature. It was to provide security, but also to provide supplies and resources for the Kurdish population who had been displaced during the Gulf War. And so, you know, it is all about fighting and winning wars, but it's also to provide security and sometimes humanitarian relief to people as a result of warfare as well. The purpose of the military, again, is to fight and win wars. It's all about mission readiness. Our cycle is training, 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 constantly, every day, sometimes for weeks and months. Then when it becomes important, it's always important, but when it becomes especially critical, when we deploy, that's when we take all of that training and apply it to a real world situation. And then hopefully once we accomplish that mission, and we have successfully completed those tasks that were put before us, we come home. And then we simply, well, I say simply, but we just repeat the same thing throughout a career. Go back into that training mode again, train, train, train. Another war comes, a conflict, a mission, a situation that we have to respond to. We go, we execute the mission, and we do our job, and then we come home again. And this is the life cycle of what it is to be in the military. And, you know, I mentioned this, in fact, in the next slide. I believe that's where I have a quote, if we could go to that. And this is really it in a nutshell, that the bedrock of military success requires a cohesive trusting culture that demands the highest levels of performance and accountability from the individual, while the individual holds those around him or her to similar standards. This is kind of known as that. You may have heard the expression, I got your six. Your six is kind of considered your backside, your back. And it's a phrase that means a lot to any veteran and to anybody in the military. And what this means is that, you know, our level or our gauge of success in the military, quite honestly, is in and of itself stressful. It's to accomplish the mission. It's to go in with your team and focus on the mission and accomplish that to the highest levels of performance that you can. But success is also defined by returning home and literally bringing people home. And that is quite a push. Well, I guess maybe a very demanding environment is to understand the concept that part of our success is coming home alive. You know, I encourage you to think about that, is to literally pick up everything that you have, go with your team off to an assignment that could be 3 days, or it could be a year and a half. And the goal is to not only accomplish that mission, but also to bring everyone back alive. And so that is really the whole gist of military and military culture that I definitely wanted to share with you today, is to help you kind of understand that those individuals who go into the military volunteer. We do not have a draft. We have not had a draft in our country. I think it was 1973. So volunteering and going into the military is what we should be doing and encouraging. In fact, volunteering, having a volunteer service is in fact a critical matter of national security. But another thing has to be true as well, is that when veterans leave the military, part of that sustainability of a volunteer force recognizes that there are things for that veteran when he or she leaves the military, that there are in fact educational opportunities, that there are jobs, and that there are other opportunities to take advantage of, not necessarily just in receiving benefits, but also that our culture and that our society will welcome our veterans home and provide support and assistance where necessary to re-engage back into that civilian culture. And I can assure you that there are a lot of challenges there. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So one of the things that is very true is that the Department of Defense prepares and trains civilians for the best military force in the world, but does very little to prepare our armed forces for civilian transition. There was a program, and it still exists, called TAP, or transition assistance program. I actually was a TAP facilitator with the state of Illinois for about 4 years, and it was one of the most fun things that I ever did in this career, because I got to be back in a room with people who were serving right then. They were active duty Marines and people from the Navy, and even some Army and Air Force as well. And it was so much fun to be there to help them identify some of the benefits and services and resources that they should take advantage of when they got out. But I can assure you that from all of that training, including my own transition, it's very lacking. I didn't invent this saying, but somebody pointed this out to me, that I do say this occasionally about military service and transition, is that you can hear everything about transition, but you truly don't know what it's like until you experience it yourself. Last week, I had the honor of presenting some VA VRE, or Veteran Readiness and Employment information, to a group of soon to retire Michigan National Guard. And it was one of the first times in many years that I got to return to that environment of people active in their uniform and giving them some information about things that they may want to look at when they get out of the service. So one of the things I mentioned to them was that fact about transition. When I transitioned out of the military, it was, of course, after the Gulf War, and I was medically separated from the service. When I went back to my home community, which was Columbus, Ohio, and whether it was an old job that I went to, or going to campus, being around my family, being around my friends, going out or things, everything definitely seemed different. And for quite a long time, I truly felt like everyone else was crazy. When you're in the military and you are used to literally and figuratively going 150 to 200 miles an hour, it feels like almost every day. When you come back out and get into the civilian world, it feels like everyone is going about 25 miles an hour. And that can be incredibly challenging. I could name a lot of other things that I experienced, but I do believe that especially trying to understand why people make the decisions that they do, or maybe recognizing that we assess leadership much more closely, wondering how some people can be in the positions that they're at. Why do people do the things they do? Things of that nature can really be troubling for us, and it's not easy to just simply fit back in again. We can be very critical of the people around us, including myself. So we go from team back to one. And I've mentioned this in many of my other presentations, but it's so true that when we leave the military, there is a void. There is a vacuum that's created that often for most of us, we cannot fill any longer. The adrenaline, the uniform, the deployments, perhaps even combat experience, and being in that adrenaline-filled, those moments. For most of us, we're not going to get those things back. And we're also not always going to get back the camaraderie and that sense of belonging, the sense of something larger than ourselves, the sense of having someone watching our six and feeling and knowing that you also have that responsibility. When we get out, we go from a team to one individual again, free speaking, free thinking individual. And I'm telling you from personal experience, it can be one of the most scary things ever, is transition. I was in places in the world where people literally were killing each other. And one would think that you would be, and yes, there's truth that there is fear in those environments. But I don't think I experienced fear more than on the 24th of February, 1993, when I packed up my stuff. My blue jean, I like to say my blue jeans, my Aussie t-shirt, and I grabbed all my stuff and jumped in my little Chevy S10 and left the gates of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and had a 6-hour drive back up to Columbus, Ohio. I think I was literally shaking. Even though I had a plan, knew that I was a disabled vet, that I was going to be using my VRNE benefit to help me get into a new job, a new education, or a different education, I still felt like I was overwhelmed, that I didn't really know who I was going to connect with. And for a long time, I was not even able to articulate what that was. And that truly was a transitional adjustment that I went through. And so years later, I've been able to articulate that a lot better. And I've also been able to advise, hopefully, hundreds, if not thousands of veterans about, and learned from them that they, in fact, shared a lot of that transitional adjustment, those challenges as well. But I will tell you that there is one thing that does remain in the vast majority of the veterans who get out of the military service. Even if they're not able to articulate it, those folks are still looking for fulfillment. They're looking for challenges. They're looking to participate in something that is greater than themselves. They are looking for, in fact, a new mission. It's just challenging for them to be able to articulate that and to be able to visualize what that looks like to them. That's why I'm such a proponent for bottom-up community grassroots organizations out in the community. There is no transition assistance program out here for our veterans. And especially when you add in other complications like financial stress, family stress, disabilities such as post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury and orthopedic injuries, broken bones, and conditions that come from military service. All of these can add up and can be quite overwhelming when we transition out. We are told where to go, but sometimes we don't want to go there because we don't trust the organization or the agency or the people. My encouragement always to my community partners is, even if you haven't served in the military, that's totally fine. Many people, if not most people, haven't. But I think it's important for us to understand a little bit about military culture and about where these people come from and the situations and the type of work environments that are created, that where this person is and where they've been. I think I would want you to ask questions and have veterans tell stories to you about their experience. And I'm not talking about combat or war stories necessarily. I'm talking more about how their contributions in the military helped to perhaps challenge themselves and certainly to how their efforts and actions led to success of their team, and getting them to talk about how they overcame challenges. I think that's one of the best ways of being able to help bridge that so-called military and civilian cultural gap, which is so prevalent in our culture. So I think we can go on to, I think there's one more, and that's basically it. I want to wrap up because I know that there's probably going to be some questions. As I mentioned, upcoming, I would expect that we will be able to continue and dive a little bit deeper into some of those transitional challenges. We certainly can get into more of and perhaps some knowledge about accommodations and tips for working with veterans in that capacity, but also being able to share resources from around the state and having an opportunity to meet other people like me who do things on behalf of veterans, especially when it comes to employment. I'll also mention briefly that my organization, Invest Vets, if you have any questions about that organization, basically in a nutshell, we have close to 500 employers who have demonstrated a passion for hiring veterans. We share their job postings with a large email group. We also hold weekly virtual networking events so that veterans, community partners, and employers can all join together to participate in that discussion about fostering that cultural exchange, about being someone who served and being someone who didn't, and hopefully being able to drive some dialogue that can help bridge those parties and bridge those gaps between the parties. With that, I am going to stop. I know I may have gone over by a couple minutes, but I am so grateful for your time and attention today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa or whoever, and we'll take some questions if we have time. So thank you so much.
Hi, Mike, and thank you. We really enjoyed your information, and thank you so much for sharing. Are there any questions or comments, thoughts, or ideas that we can address with Mike, or perhaps share some insight to that you may have at this time? We had a few comments come in that, you know, they appreciated the information that was coming across, and they didn't realize that, you know, there were so many changes. And actually what we found to be really interesting was, Mike, and we've kind of talked about this a bit before, of that lack of the assistance with transitioning back to civilian life. You know, that's a huge area where I think we can really support our veteran population and being able to help them be more successful and kind of prepare what's going to happen and what's coming. So Mike, we have a question here that says, where can we find the resources for potential employers that support vets?
Lisa, first about your 1 point, yes, I completely agree about the transitional and some of that, because quite frankly, a lot of that has not been discussed over the years. And I want to keep that discussion going. It is definitely important for us to be able to quickly welcome and bring service members into our community. And I also bring this up because many of you may be frontline in people who work with the population and veterans population. These are places that have potential for veterans becoming disenfranchised, in fact. That's why we want so much to share proper information with our partners out there, so that you know and anticipate some of the questions that veterans may have, and you are armed with the right information. As far as resources go, there's a couple things that I can share with you. One is that one of the state organizations, one of the state agencies, is MVAA, or the Michigan Veterans Affairs, or the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency. And they have been around since 2013. They have a program that is referred to and known as VFE, or the Veteran Friendly Employer Program. And one way to access that would be, and I know that they have a website, I believe it is michiganveterans.com, I think, we'll have to verify that. But the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency does have a veteran-friendly employer program. And I do believe that they display all of the employers throughout their bronze, silver, and gold categories for people to be able to see. I do encourage people to look at those companies. I don't believe that they have specific points of contact, but they tend to refer you to the website of the company at least, and often to their career and maybe even their veteran pages. I would also certainly encourage you to connect with me, with InvestVets. Our employers who have sought us out over the last 6 years have expressed the interest about hiring veterans. We didn't really have to do a whole lot, and well, we did a lot, but we didn't really have to do a whole lot in terms of cold calling to getting employers interested in this. Other places and other potential avenues around the state, there are VCATs, or Veteran Community Action Teams, or regional veterans coalitions, such as the one that I belong to, which is the Region 7 Lansing Area Veterans Coalition. There are other places, there are other agencies. The Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity with the Veteran Services Division. These are the Veterans Employment Reps, or Veteran Career Advisors, that typically are housed at Michigan Works locations. Those folks are absolutely phenomenal, working with the veteran population in a variety of different ways. But on employment, it's typically about identifying veterans who have challenges to employment, barriers to employment, and helping mitigate those barriers, but then also business outreach as well and connecting with employers. And with that, I mean, there are other agencies and organizations out there. I know that I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but perhaps in one of our, and when we get to that training, when we get to that point, Lisa, I think that the group will be really surprised to see how many different partners there are out there.
Yes, Mike, I think you're absolutely right. And we really look forward to building on to these future presentations. So we have another question that came in, and it's, does the military accept individuals who have had an IEP, special education services, in high school and have received a certificate of completion due to their disability, meaning they did not graduate with a diploma?
Lisa, I'm always the one to say that if I don't know something, I'm not going to blow smoke, which is an Army and military term. So I'm not going to make anything up. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that what we would need to do in that situation would be to contact a recruiter. And that could probably be with any of the branches, certainly not the Army exclusively. But I would encourage the person who asked the question to reach out and call a recruiter and ask them. That is a very interesting question, and I honestly wish I had the answer to it.
Well, Mike, we appreciate transparency with that. And this may be another one that you might not know the answer to, but you may. So it came in as, is it true that the military will not accept individuals who have been diagnosed with ADHD and have been prescribed ADHD related medications?
That's a great question that I simply don't know the answer to, but these are perfect questions for recruiters because they're going to have the up-to-date information about all of the different potential barriers to getting into military service. If there's one thing I do know, recruiters are eager to bring people into the military and to create success for those, well, I'm old enough now, I call them kids, for those kids to come in and make a difference if they want to in their lives. Look, there are definitely a lot of pre-existing conditions that the military will accept people into active military. But again, I think I'm not qualified to answer those directly. I think a recruiter would be best to answer those. But wonderful question, though.
Makes perfect sense. And since we're nearing time, it is now 2 p.m. and we're scheduled to end. I would just like to take this opportunity to provide some closing remarks and some thank yous. Thank you, Mike, so very much for your time, your energy, your expertise, and your transparency in the information that you have provided for us and our viewers today. Want to give a special thank you to Tyler Gross for your assistance and all your technical support. It's very much appreciated. And also as well, a special shout out and thank you to our sign language interpreters, Bethany and Katie, for always being willing to assist and to make our presentations accessible. We appreciate you tremendously. We thank you all in the audience for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time as we prepare series number 2. So with that, we wish you a great day. Enjoy Veterans Day and Veterans Month, and please know we do appreciate your service.